thank you so much. I'm so excited all of you are here. Can you believe it's almost the end of 2021? That is nuts. We're primarily going to be talking about 2020, which, while a very historic year, it's not normally yet the topic of history lectures. But something really important happened in Euharlee's history in 2020. First, I'm going to start with the question, which I think I know the answer for most people here. Has everybody been to Euharlee? Except for, I know there's one in the back that has not been to Euharlee, but wonderful. The first time I spoke here, I got through my entire lecture, and the very first question was, where is Euharlee? So, I like to start with that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Euharlee Presbyterian Church Cemetery and Black Pioneer Cemetery before I get into the storm and the restoration, just to make sure you know the context of what we're going to be talking about. Here is our beautiful church before the storm. Euharlee Presbyterian Church was founded in 1853. This building was completed in 1855. It underwent a few changes over its history, and that is important to our story related to the storm because there are reasons why we couldn't take it back to how it originally looked. This was, along with the Baptist Church, along with Oak Grove Methodist, other churches in the area, that was the center of the community. That was the social activities, that was education. Our Euharlee Institute, which became Bartow County Rural High School, which became Euharlee Elementary School, was started by the Presbyterian Church. And so everything really went back to these buildings, to these institutions. So unfortunately, this church closed in 2011. I know that there's at least one person in this room who got married in the church and spent a lot of time there. It's an important building to a lot of people in Euharlee, and it was sad when the congregation left and the church closed. In 2014, the properties were given to the city of Euharlee. So now the museum and welcome center is located in the former education building that was built in 1998 that's adjacent to this. So I had a front row seat to a lot of this happening over the last year and a half. Here's an image of the church. I don't have the exact date of this picture, but you can see it has changed quite a bit. Obviously, there's not a fence there now. The road is in a different place, and the grading is different from that image. Adjacent to that is the Euharlee Presbyterian Cemetery. The first burial is from 1854, so before the building was actually completed. We have approximately 400 markers, monuments in the cemetery. There are a lot that are unmarked, either because it's the monument is gotten run over by a maintenance person along the way, or perhaps it was marked with a wooden cross 100 years ago and that has since been lost. We, prior to this storm, we contracted somebody to undertake a survey of the entire cemetery to answer those questions. Because of various reasons, including the storm, including COVID, that survey is not yet complete. So we're looking forward to seeing everything that's going to be resulted from that. Carl Etheridge, who I think many of you know, is the person that has undertaken that project for us. And we still have burials occurring. So there are funerals out there. There are plots that have been sold. There are empty plots that we get contacted that people want to purchase. Either they have a loved one that was there, that's buried there, they went to church there, or they're just looking for a place to buy a burial plot for the future. So our biggest concern and why we undertook the survey is we were encountered with the potential of accidentally unearthing a grave when we were trying to bury somebody. And so that really spurred us on not too long before the storm happened. And since it's kind of it's not too small of a group, but a small group, if you have a question, feel free to ask a question while we're going through this. So I will get to that in just a moment. Yes, I will get to that in just a moment. And then we also have, adjacent to the Presbyterian Cemetery and the Baptist Cemetery on the other side, we have the Euharlee Black Pioneer Cemetery. This is a 1-acre piece of land that was set aside by Euharlee Presbyterian and what became Euharlee Baptist. They set it aside in 1855 as a burial ground for the enslaved members of the community and members of the church. After burial ceased here in the early 1900s, this cemetery largely was forgotten. I hesitate to use the word abandoned, but it became extremely overgrown. So a lot of the trees you see when you come out on November 6th, and you see this, a lot of those trees you see in there today were not there when the cemetery was originally started, but they are now historic trees. And so it's a very wooded area, and it takes a lot of maintenance to clean it up and give the people who are buried there the respect they deserve. Initially, in 1998, it was almost completely leveled. The founder of the Euharlee Historical Society, Mary Ellen Taft, stopped that from occurring, and then along with Etowah Valley Historical Society, the city of Euharlee, they cleaned up the cemetery. Carl Etheridge was instrumental in this as well. And he identified 333 graves. Part of that land, so when you look at the plats and the surveys of this land, you see down the middle, that's actually two separate plats with two separate owners of the land. So the Baptist Church still owns the land that the cemetery is on the right side, and then the city of Euharlee now owns the land on the left side. So that creates some interesting issues as we go forth with cemetery preservation. But another issue, well, not issue, but thing that we hope to correct in the future, I guess it is an issue, is we only have 3 names of identified people buried in this cemetery. We don't know exactly where they're buried. This is one image we have. This is Mrs. Het Powell. She was brought to Georgia. She was brought to Euharlee and was enslaved from her birth. Was brought from South Carolina, and after the Civil War, she continued to live here after emancipation. She continued to live in Euharlee, and she is now buried in that cemetery. Her descendants still live in this area, and they come and visit the cemetery. I know they've visited the museum before. I don't know if Sue's ever encountered them, but I've gotten the opportunity to meet several of her descendants. In, what year was this? 2018, I think, we started the African-American, Valerie, you might know the year, the mitigation grant with Bartow County.
It was actually
2016, okay. 2016, you may notice around Euharlee and other places, there were several cell towers that were built near fire stations. Because of that, they disrupted the historic viewshed, and our cemetery and other historic sites benefited from that. There was a mitigation grant that basically money had to be paid and put into preserving and doing something for history in Bartow County, and it was chosen that they would benefit the sites for the Bartow County African American Heritage Trail. Our Pioneer Cemetery is one of those sites, and so we've been under this grant to put in this trail for several years. This is important because we were very, very close to finishing it when this storm that we're about to talk about happened. So, Saturday, January 11th, 2020. It was a very windy day. It was about, I want to say it was about 3:30, 4 o'clock. I got a text message from one of my volunteers from a different committee, not with the museum. She lives across the street from the museum, and she lives across the street from the Presbyterian Church. And she texted me and said, "Is the church getting a new roof?" I said, "I really hope not." So she sent me a picture, and from that side, you couldn't see from the, it was not this side, it was the other side from this. She lives on the left side. I'm not good at directions, so don't ask me if that's north, east, or west. But then her husband and her son walked around and saw this. She sent me this picture, and I said, oh no, we have a big problem. It's been determined it was straight line winds that came through. There were tornadoes in Paulding County. There were tornadoes in other places. You see some other pictures. I'm not a meteorologist, but something big, something came through and did a lot of damage. So blew off our roof of the church. It got dark very quickly. It's January. And after that call, I called Trey. I called other people. Other people posted, driving by, saw this, posted on Facebook. And before you know it, there were people just arriving, asking what they could do to help. What can we do to save this? My husband also works for the city of Euharlee. He's a lot more useful in this kind of situation. So he left. I continued to watch our now 5-year-old, but I was making phone calls and doing what we could do to get people there. People showed up with tarps. People showed up, moved everything out that could get out of the building, tarped what couldn't get out of the building, and did the best they could. It continued to rain, and it made it very difficult for the ceiling and the roof to be tarped. And so water is still kind of getting into the attic and just really getting this ceiling soaking wet. These aren't great pictures. These were for insurance purposes, but we get to use them for this now. So that's why they're not super great pictures. You can see this is the pews were completely tarped. These are pews that date to the late 1800s. And then all of the items that could be taken out were brought to my building and took over every single room that was available to try to dry out and get them out of harm's way. So those were the main focuses. I will say, and these were some hard days. I know a lot of people had harder days in 2020 following this, but at that point we thought this could be the worst thing that was going to happen that year. Our city manager emphasized and our mayor emphasized the most beautiful thing was the fact that all these people showed up and they cared. People from all over reached out to see what they could do to help and really talk. It was amazing to see that sense of community happening in Euharlee.
Was there other damage in Euharlee?
Yes, we're about to get to that too. You guys have great questions. Outside of our historic sites, I will say there was a path that you could follow from Joe Cowan Park, which is up by our city hall, just right across Cover Bridge Road. Tennis courts, the fence on the tennis courts was completely ripped down. Our city hall's light flagpole was like this, completely bent from the bottom. Huge trees just in that line. It was like, if it was straight line winds, if it was a tornado, whatever it was, had a direction, because my building is next door. The only thing that happened to my building was the flyer for the community cleanup for the cemetery we had scheduled for the next week got torn off the door and nothing else. Of course I still have that because I thought it was an important part of the story. So the next day, the rain gave us a little reprieve and the sunlight came out and we got to see what happened in the cemeteries. We thought the church was bad. The cemeteries were way worse, specifically the Pioneer Cemetery. Top right is a piece of roof that got blown all the way to the Pioneer Cemetery. The people in the pictures, you have to excuse their faces. They weren't like smiling and happy. It was just one of those awkward, like, what am I supposed to do with my face kind of thing. He's home, he's out of town this week, so he doesn't know I put this in here. My boss up there in the middle. This is our city manager, James Stevens. I had them in these pictures for scale, so you can kind of see how large these trees were that got taken down. So those are all, that's a set of graves from one of the Jolly families in the Presbyterian Cemetery. This is the roof, the part of the roof that stayed close by, and it fell directly off and knocked down the first row of all of our monuments, including the very first burial in the cemetery. This is a cedar tree that just fell over, just completely fell over and unearthed. And knocked over a couple of monuments. Have you ever driven down Covered Bridge Road and seen the Euharlee Pioneer Cemetery plaque that was just on the last slide? It was twisted and flipped. So it should be facing the road to the right. It was twisted and facing down. Fortunately, it wasn't damaged, minus just being knocked off of its base. And then the bottom right, that's my husband Seth, and he is about 5'9½", so that tells you how big that root ball was, and that's also in the Pioneer Cemetery. So in all, we saw about 15 large trees taken down in the Pioneer Cemetery, 2 in the Presbyterian Cemetery, and then out of all 400, miraculously, only 300 monuments were actually damaged, despite there being debris everywhere. So at the same time, public was showing up, the media was showing up, and we had to secure everything. We put some police out front to make sure that for safety purposes, people couldn't come around. But it was a big mess. So this is inside the church. This is on Monday, still raining, started raining really hard again. And the ceiling is not the original ceiling. I think the last renovation they did was in 1996, I believe. And that's, so all of this is sheetrock. This is not the original plaster that they would have had. But it started falling on our heads while we were in there. That was not very fun. Everything was getting soaked, but we did find out that what was original was going to be able to be saved. So that was a nice thing. Even a few days in, we were able to pinpoint, talk to our insurance company. They approved the temporary roof so we could finally tarp the building. I say we like I was up there with the hammer. The company that we asked to tarp the building could tarp the building. And then Rainbow Restoration came in. They took out the pews. They were very diligent. The collections person in me was very excited that they numbered everything, every side, which way they were supposed to go, and they put them into the truck. And then they took them to our maintenance building, wrapped them up, and they want to dry them out, but not too much. Because obviously if you're drying out 120, 30-year-old wood, you're going to lead to some really significant damage. So they were very diligent and careful with what they did to restore those. The floors, we found out, were just really one layer thick. And that was in our favor because it was easier to dry out. We didn't have to worry about rot and mold coming in. And so the two things that we were the most concerned about, the floors and the pews, were able to be saved. And so that, we started to feel like, okay, the church, like we have insurance, it's insured, they're going to fix it. It's going to be a while, but that's in a good path. And so then our attentions really went to the cemeteries. Make sure that oh wait, we got to look at some cool stuff. So this was late January, late January, that they already were taking out large chunks of the ceiling. They ended up taking out the entire ceiling. And all of the walls. Fortunately, the windows, only one pane was cracked out of all of those windows. So there's a lot of really good things that happened. You can see there the difference from this picture on the left, the top right, where they had added some closets and some storage and made the back of the church ADA compliant with a handicapped accessible entrance. And so you can see the difference in the historic construction versus, so that was a cool thing that we actually got to see some of the bones of the building while we were doing this. A lot of them are. Well, let me say this. I don't know if they are original, they are historic. The glass is, it's the wavy glass. Sorry, what? Yes, thank you, sorry. My preservation lingo is on great part. We're doing great today. But I will say, I convinced my boss in 2018, I am giving myself kudos for this. I convinced my boss in 2018 to do 4K dollhouse photography of the church. So they came in and did detailed photography. If you go to Euharlee Weddings, You can find it. And that was crucial in our restoration efforts because we had literally exactly what the church looked like up until January 10th. And we referenced it constantly in picking out any. I will say that I did rearrange the way that the organ and the piano are now because it just made more sense the way we're doing it. But yeah, so this was an incredible resource, and my boss was really glad that I convinced him to do that in hindsight. Who would have known? I mean, we'd rather the building, not have gotten destroyed, but this was, on the left-hand side, this was November of 2020. So as you all know, March, we all go home for a while. So between that and between having to bring a building up to code that was not originally built for modern building codes, even 30 years ago, 1996, like that's a different time with different requirements. So the construction took much longer than we thought it was going to be initially. And then COVID, of course, drew that out. But we were able to do some of the exterior work sooner. And this is July 23rd, 2020. We were able to put the steeple back on the church. It was a surprise. I didn't know that it was going to be happening that exact day. So got to go out and take a picture of it, shared it on social media. And it was something that I didn't expect the response to be so huge. The newspaper called and said, we want to do a story about the steeple being put back on the church because she saw it on Facebook. But I think, it'd been a really hard couple months. People were excited to see something positive happening. So unfortunately, we could not keep the steeple that was on there. We did salvage it. But it was too far damaged. But I don't know why they designed it the way it looks today. But it does have the original bell still in there, and it is functioning. So the church is in a good place at that point. And I'm going to go back to the Presbyterian Cemetery. So we're going to go back to January 12th after the storm. And first we had to get a move on the church building so that we could even assess all the damage that was under the debris. This right here, let's see, the far right, that's the very first burial. It's hard to see in this image, but you see how the bottom part is broken off and jagged. The rest of it's still stuck in the ground there. We had Carl Etheridge come out and help survey, and we were able to survey all of the monuments and figure out exactly how many. And the problem is some of our monuments were already in poor condition, already knocked over. And so we were having to determine, for insurance purposes, what is new damage and what is just lasting damage we haven't been able to fix yet. The way you find out is you lift it up and see if there's dirt or grass underneath it. So it's pretty simple. I did drop one on my leg, but yeah, it was my friend Joan's family member, and she thought it was very funny. If you know Joan, you would think that's funny. So we were fortunate with this very first headstone. We were able to save it. Frank Perkins and Carsville Monuments ended up doing all of the work for us for the cemetery, and he was able to just cut the bottom off as just a little bit to even it out and put it back in the ground. A lot of the damage was caused by the debris going through the cemetery, and so a lot of this is just resetting it. So we ended up being very lucky because we found out that we don't technically own the monuments, therefore our insurance would not cover them. We learned a lot about stuff because the city of Euharlee is new to cemetery ownership and maintenance. So contacting all the owners to get their individual, they're not going to be insured either. So it was quite the undertaking, but we were able to, with Frank Perkins's help, do it at a very reasonable cost. And I'll get a little bit to the funding of that in a little bit. There were two bigger areas of damage. So So this is the cedar tree that was knocked over. So you can see after we stumped it, this is what is left. Unfortunately, when you stump a tree, the root ball doesn't always go back where it originally was. However, when you're dealing with a cemetery, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're dealing with potential remains and the ethical implications of that. So we fixed the wall, but it is still uneven there, and this is one of those we have to wait and see and stay ahead of it and keep up with the deterioration of the root system as it goes along. This was the tree knocked over, so the mother's grave knocked over the daughter's grave. When I put this together, I think I thought that was poetic or something, but the Powells had some more significant damage than others. And then we, of course, have this one. So this is at the very back of the cemetery, and this oak tree was not here, or it was very small when those graves were originally put in, and it grew significantly over time, and then this storm just took it right out. And so at this point, we actually have an exposed vault, and that brings out a whole nother mess of things. Because if those roots are in the vault, then we have to have an archaeologist come and sift through the root ball, make sure if we need to remove any remains or anything like that. Once we finally were able to stump the tree and get the roots a little bit further out of the way to a safe place, we could see that the vault was still closed, and the archaeologist deemed that we did not need to go through the root ball, which saved a lot of money, which like I said, we were low on funds, and saved a lot of time. This is thanks to the county. The county road department came and assisted our public works guys. This is the stump that they cut off. That's a very large track. I don't know if you can tell. I have a picture of my husband standing on top of it. I didn't add that one today, but this is not gonna. Okay, this isn't gonna do great on this screen. It didn't flip on my computer. Sorry. It's a very large stump, very large tree. Yeah. So we're very grateful to the county. Because of the location of it being on the backside of the cemetery, there's an open land back there, so we were able to bring in heavier equipment, which we could not have moved it without. So that's what the point of that was, but I did mute it because I was afraid they may be saying bad words. So that cemetery was a little bit more straightforward with just those two problematic areas, but the Pioneer Cemetery was much more extensive and much different because we were under the terms, and still are, under the terms of that mitigation grant. There are a lot of rules about how we could go in and do any kind of maintenance in there. So, like I said before, there's so many trees that weren't there when it was originally put as a cemetery. And so because of those trees, because of the grant, because of the way the graves are, it wasn't as obvious of a path to take. So we contacted Oakland Cemetery, who had dealt with some tornado damage in 2008, to see what they did. And they led us to a couple of different people. We also talked to the archaeologist that we were working with on the mitigation grant, Steve Webb. He came out and he said, honestly, he had seen less damage in a hurricane, after a hurricane, than he saw in this cemetery. So it was a learning experience for all of us. The acidity of the soil here is such that there weren't going to be visible remains. A lot of these graves are unmarked. The markers that were put in after Carl did his investigation, a lot of them have been misplaced, have been knocked over. We are going to be remedying that in the near future. And so you saw earlier on where the graves are spread out everywhere. These trees are all in the middle of it. And so we had to be very, very careful. But we're dealing with 15 of these knocked over. These are all twisted together. I mean, honestly, it wasn't safe for the first couple of weeks till things started to settle for more than just a few people to be in there. We're really grateful to Commissioner Taylor and the Bartow County Road Department and Sherry Henshaw and Missy Phillips at Keep Bartow Beautiful. They were essential to helping us get the resources we needed to be able to move these things out of here. I don't have a lot of pictures of some of the cleanups. We used detention crews with the Bartow County Road Department, and out of respect for them, didn't want to share some of those images of, without their consent. So they were having to hand cut these large trees and haul them out one by one to get them out of there, because we couldn't bring anything larger than a lawnmower into the cemetery. We had a great awl. Do you guys know what a great awl is? I didn't put a picture on there. I didn't know what it was till this. The piece of equipment they let us use, or they used, I just watched in horror. It's a very anxious time for me. It's basically a very large truck, and this specific one has a grabber. That's what I call it. It's an official term. And it's a very large claw that would wrap around the trunk and either could lift it out and pull it out, or sometimes like the end might drag. But a lot of the trees were around the perimeter. And so we were able to move some of the trees that way, get them out, drag them out, without doing more damage, just following that path of where the tree fell, so that we're not doing any more damage to the landscape. But that was terrifying to watch. But we were very, like I said, very grateful to them. So we're still in the midst of this cleanup. We had Georgia Power, Citizens Georgia Power Plant Bowen chapter has adopted this cemetery in large part, and they were able to get the funds and donated the use of a stump grinder. It was literally, you could have fit like a smart car in there. It was so large, so deep. But again, these are graves that are within those root balls, and so they didn't land exactly like they were supposed to. And so the stump grinder, we at least could get it even as much as we, get a little more even to the ground, make it a little bit safer. Again, we're going to be watching for years as we are going to be experiencing settling. I don't want to use the word sinkhole, but that's what, we're constantly going to be having to watch this until everything is settled from these deteriorating root balls, because they are so large. And so it's not going to look like it once did. But it's part of its history, it's part of its story, and we're trying to be as respectful as possible. We are almost done with the trail. We have half of it finally completed. All the materials have been purchased, everything's waiting. Georgia Power has been so helpful, but because of COVID, they have been limited to the amount of time they could give us. Georgia Power, because if they get sick, the lights don't come on, and we don't get to live like we like to live, so they're very conscious of keeping their workers safe. So I found out yesterday, on November 12th, they'll be coming out and finishing the trail with us. So I hoped it was going to be before November 6th, but in the cemetery tour, but we are excited to see the future for that. The way that we funded as much as we could fund is we did start a cemetery fund. The city council voted to have a designated cemetery fund for cemetery maintenance, for repairs and the ongoing cemetery maintenance. So this is my plug also. You can go to the GoFundMe, which is still active. We raised about $1,500 so far, which covered the monuments and covered some of the maintenance that we've had to do. But Georgia Power has also been very generous, and they've given us a $5,000 grant that as soon as the trail is done, we will begin ground penetrating radar of the entire cemetery to make sure that we have identified every grave in there, and then also get slate markers to put at each site, so that hopefully we can move forward in maintaining the cemetery at a higher level. So some future considerations with this, again, watching deterioration of land, and once we get everything in place, developing our ongoing maintenance plan so we can stay ahead of it. It's going to be something that like I said, a decade from now, 15 years from now, we're still going to be worrying about. So yeah, that's, oh, and on October 19th, we had a ribbon cutting to celebrate the completion of the church building. A lot of the Bartow Street Museum staff was able to attend, and we appreciate that. And the pews are back in, the instruments are back in. It's beautiful to see. I walked in one day, it was almost a year ago, I walked in and the contractors were in there and I said, oh, there's a ceiling and walls. And they just laughed at me and I'm like, no, last time I was in here, the wall was falling, or the ceiling was falling in on my head. Like, I'm so excited to have this happen. So it's, again, another bright spot in what's been kind of a very difficult time for everybody over the last year and a half. So come see all three of these sites on November 6th for the Euharlee Cemetery Tour. We're so excited that you guys chose us to feature this year. We can't wait. Get your tickets now. Can they buy them tonight?
Yes.
Although I feel like most people in this room probably already have them, but that's okay. Yes. That is a great question. For rentals, it's a rental facility, so if you have a wedding or an event you'd like to have in there, our goal is to also start having more community events. The Euharlee Historical Society has been great in including the church already in several events that they've had, and they featured it on their 2018 historic holiday tour. So there's a lot of opportunities. Some ideas that have been discussed is like a gospel sing in there, and some other, maybe a quilt show, some other different things that we can use the facility for. Yeah. If you have quilts.
Yeah, I'm part of the Edible Guild.
Well, let's talk later. Yeah, absolutely. It'll be fun to have something out there. So. That too. It seats about 200, like 195 is our limit in there. It's got a double aisle, so there's 3 sections of the pews, so it is pretty big. You looked surprised that it fit that many, so about 195 is what it fits in there. So yes, it just doesn't have a center aisle, and that turns some people off. But you can't. I mean, the pews and the rich wood and everything. I mean, I think it's beautiful. Yes, it actually was. It was scouted for Dolly Parton's Netflix Coat of Many Colors, but they didn't obviously choose it. But yeah, it was.
And it's all ADA approved.
It is. So when the city were given the properties in 2014, we had to actually there was a couple things that we had to do. So we had to build a parking pad in the back. They had already made it wheelchair accessible and then I think we did some modifications to one of the bathrooms also to make it compliant. The parking is, that's why we had to do a parking pad. The parking is not great in that sanctuary, or in front of the sanctuary. It is on a hill and it's gravel, but we have, for events, we have ways around that. So, yeah. Well, so next door is the Welcome Center Museum. We have 43 spots over there. And then in the past, we've done things for other events like shuttle for those who aren't in a wheelchair or anything. They can get out and get into like a gator or something and shuttle that way. Yeah.
You mentioned there was a beginning in restoring the church that you were not able to go back.
Yes. Oh, I didn't say why. The insurance, again, the insurance company, we were insured for what it looked like on January 11th. Not for what it used to look like. I lobbied really hard because my understanding is the ceiling that there is today was not there. It would have been almost all the way up to the roof. And then there was a balcony also where the enslaved members would sit, yes. So, yeah. Any other questions? Trey? All right. Come visit the Euharlee Welcome Center and History Museum. We're located at 33 Covered Bridge Road. So when you turn off Euharlee Road left onto Covered Bridge Road, we're the very first building on the left. If you hit this building, you've gone too far. It is right next door. We're open Tuesday through Sunday, so Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 4, Saturday, 12 to 4, Sunday, 2 to 4, and you can come see Sue Cox on Sunday sometimes, but not this Sunday because our heater broke.
Is that covered by insurance?
It is. No. We're getting apart. It's just I didn't want to make them chilly this weekend, so don't come visit us this weekend. But it is free admission, and we have permanent exhibits and temporary exhibits, and and you don't have to pay to hear me talk. You can just come do it for free. Just kidding. I'm sorry.
I've been wanting to know something about the old mill.
Okay.
I know there was some talk about restoring the old mill. Is that still going on?
It is still on everyone's mind. What happened, there are a couple different things happened with that. The initial plan, when they put out the bids, or put out for bids, it came in all the bids came in way over budget, like $1 million over budget. So on top of that, then we had the city had the opportunity to work with the county to get a sewer system down Euharlee Road down to Cover Bridge Road, because we do hope eventually to have a little bit more economic development happening down there. And so that became the focus. We've paid that off. And so I hope that will be coming in the near future. We just hired a new economic development director, and so I think a lot of really exciting things are going to be happening. And that is on the top of my list.
It's on my mind.
Good. Yes, Joshua.
Yeah, so you were saying that the city owns half of Black Pioneer Cemetery and the Baptist Church has the other half.
Yes.
Was the damage concentrated to one area or?
Yes. Some of the debris and one tree on the Baptist side. In the Baptist Church, our cemetery and their church was it was untouched, just like the museum was. So it was primarily on our side. We do, because of the grant, the mitigation grant, we actually have an MOU with the Baptist Church that we're allowed to do whatever we need to do in terms of upkeep. So that wasn't an issue when it came to the storm either, because we were still working under that. And they're grateful because they don't have a very big congregation. But yeah, there are some really large trees that came down on Cover Bridge Road right next to the Baptist Church, but they were largely spared, which is good. Uh-huh.
Is that good through Euharlee, or how does that?
That's a great question. So the African American Heritage Trail is through the whole county, and so that was an effort started by Justice Robert Benham, and there are how many sites? 8. There's 9 sites, 9 driving sites. Oh, okay. We've got pamphlets here. 2 of the sites are in Euharlee. Most of it's driving throughout the county, but then there's a walking tour in downtown Cartersville as well. So, yeah. Okay, great. It's a great. And Laura J. Worked with Sherry and Justice Benham and put together an incredible pamphlet that's really detailed, and then there's some online components as well.
Thank you, Katie, for being here and sharing the story with us.
Thank you.